You blinked, and Where Winds Meet is no longer the same game. Update 1.2 has arrived with the kind of changes you can't just call tweaks. It changed the pacing, it changed the builds, it changed the way you explore, and even the way fights unfold when everything spirals out of control. The craziest part is that some of these updates seem minor in the patch notes, but in practice, they completely change the feel of the gameplay. So today, I'm going to show you what really changed in 1.2, what got better, what might have become more punishing, and most importantly, what you need to do now to enjoy this update the right way, without wasting time or falling into the traps it created. This new region, 9 Mortal Ways Base, in the 1.2 update, gives me that great feeling of the game giving you a new playground to mess around in without requiring a massive open world marathon just to start having fun. Based on what was released in the roadmap/info for version 1.2, it arrives as a new region in the January package and is part of this large wave of content the game has been receiving. What I love about this compact and fun zone idea in the upper left of Kaifeng is that it changes the pace. Instead of just traveling long distances from point to point, it feels like a place designed for you to drop in and immediately stumble upon things happening. The detail of it possibly linking with Roaring Sands gives the impression that the map is stitching the areas together better, making the world feel more coherent and less fragmented. Now, the real spice is the chaotic tone you described. Hilarious content, half of the ghost market, and activities that sound more social and unpredictable than just a reward checklist. When Where Winds Meet nails that weird market/supernatural energy vibe, it provides a great contrast to the more serious side of the campaigns. So having a new area playing with that is the kind of update I'll always want to see. Furthermore, those duels with NPCs that yield resonance melodies are the kind of detail that easily wins me over, because it transforms combat into a memory. It's not just about winning and getting loot. It's about winning and taking a sonic/thematic souvenir. In practice, this usually encourages you to test different builds and styles just to see what else you can unlock and collect. And that's when the region stops being small and becomes a recurring loop. To me, 9 Mortal Ways Base sounds like that mandatory stop between one major mission and the next. You go in to relax, leave with a unique reward, and still feel that the world is alive, full of NPCs, mini activities, and surprises. If the proposal is indeed this mix of compact, funny, and packed with stuff, it could be one of the best pacing changes in Update 1.2. This change in 1.2, featuring new main story chapters within the Kaifeng map, is exactly the type of update that grips me the most, because it's not just extra stuff. It's the game saying its backbone is still growing. When a new campaign takes place on the same map you already know, the feeling is almost like returning to an old neighborhood and discovering a new street, new gossip, and new drama happening on every corner. What I find coolest about a Kaifeng campaign is that Kaifeng stops being just a backdrop and becomes a character. New campaign quests tend to recontextualize places that were previously just transit routes. That gate you used to walk through without thinking now carries weight. That square becomes a meeting point, and even a seemingly empty corner gains purpose because the narrative decided to live there. I also really enjoy it when a game expands the main story without it feeling like a patch, but rather like continuity. If these new chapters were designed to fit into what has already happened, they can answer old questions while planting new tensions. The kind of plot that makes you finish a quest and immediately look at the map thinking, okay, so where is this going to blow up next? There is also a practical detail. Campaign quests are usually the best way to push the player to use the game's most complete mechanics, not just the most efficient ones. When the narrative places you in specific situations, you end up varying your approach, paying attention to NPCs, reading between the lines, and combat stops being just performance. It becomes a consequence of what you chose to do in the story. In the end, expanding narrative with campaign quests is the update that most changes how you feel about the game, not just what you do in it. If 1.2 is truly bringing new main story chapters to Kaifeng, it looks like an upgrade that gives purpose to the grind, context to the world, and above all, that urge to keep playing just one more mission until you realize it's already dawn. These legacy quests in 1.2 sound like the kind of content I value most in open world RPGs. It's not just more missions to fill the map, but missions to give meaning to what already exists. When a side quest is linked to the main narrative, it stops being a detour and becomes that hidden chapter that changes how you interpret characters, factions, and even choices you thought were simple. What I find most interesting is how this format often functions almost like world archaeology. You piece together clues, hear stories that weren't told in the main campaign, and suddenly a small detail becomes a key piece of the lore. It's the best way to make Kaifeng, and everything around it, feel like a place with a past, with old wounds, and with people who remember what happened. Not just a stage where the protagonist arrives and solves everything. And there's a very personal aspect here. I love it when a game trusts that the player wants context, nuance, and that feeling of investigating out of curiosity rather than just for a reward. Legacy quests, when well written, give you the pleasure of finding a document, a secondary NPC, or a side story that explains the why behind the conflict. And then the combat, the duels, and the alliances stop being just mechanics and become consequences of a world that makes sense. Another advantage is that this usually improves the pacing of the experience. Instead of the main story being a train moving in a straight line, these quests create good pauses. You breathe, explore, get involved in smaller problems that are actually huge for those living in that world, and return to the main campaign with a different perspective. Sometimes even more empathy, sometimes more suspicion. Now, my real expectation is, if these legacy quests are truly tied to the main narrative, they could become the best content in 1.2 for lore fans, because they are the perfect space to reveal secrets without breaking the campaign's flow. This new world boss, the Nameless General, is one of those additions that immediately changes the mood of the game for me. You feel that the world has become more dangerous and, at the same time, more alive. Even when there isn't time to start a long quest, just knowing there's a world boss out there gives you that impulse to log in just to take a look. And before you know it, you're preparing as if it were a raid. I really like it when a world boss is placed as a landmark event because it becomes a thermometer for your real progress. It's not just about power numbers. It's about reading patterns, patience, positioning, and that ability to stay calm when the boss starts punishing small mistakes. And a name like Nameless General already carries a legendary vibe, a figure that needs no introduction to put you in your place. There is also a very satisfying side to this epic challenge story. It's the kind of fight that creates stories to tell. You. Remember the moment you almost killed it? When you took a silly hit? The build adjustment that finally clicked? And that is gold for action game fans. The boss becomes emergent content because every attempt forces you to learn something new about the combat system. Now, about completing pending Steam achievements. That's a great move for the community because it gives a concrete reason to go back and clear the backlog. Achievements are that little nudge that transforms a vague goal, I need to play more, into a clear mission. I need to take down this boss, or I need to meet this condition. And this usually greatly increases the longevity of the update. What I expect most from the Nameless General is that he's a world boss who doesn't just depend on statistics, but on respecting the rhythm of the fight, observing, adapting, and winning with consistency. This limited time event, Jianghu Martial Games, is the kind of thing that, for me, gives an immediate energy injection to the game because it shifts the focus from exploring for the sake of exploring to showing up and proving your game. The simple idea of a Jianghu-style martial festival competition already puts an atmosphere of arena and reputation in the air, as if every fight were a public message. Who you are, what you know, and even what you are hiding in your style. What I like most about these events is that they usually bring out the best side of combat, consistency and reading, rather than just raw damage. In a competition, every mistake feels bigger because you aren't fighting against the world. You are fighting to be remembered, and that changes how I play. I become more patient, more calculating, trying to win beautifully, not just quickly. The limited time aspect here is a double-edged sword that I enjoy precisely because it's dangerous. It gives that nice urgency to log in and participate while it's happening, but it also creates a seasonal memory. When an event goes away, it becomes community history. Did you get that reward? Did you manage to finish Challenge X? Which fight humiliated you the most? And this kind of conversation is what keeps the game alive outside of the game itself. Speaking of rewards, that is the detail that separates an okay event from an addictive one. Good rewards aren't just strong items, they are rewards with identity. A cosmetic that shows you participated, a resource that accelerates a build you want to test, or even something that becomes your character's signature. When the prize ties into the Jianghu theme, victory feels like a narrative achievement, not just a checklist. In my case, I would enter these martial games with a very clear mindset. Test my style in cleaner conditions. See if my gameplay holds up without depending on perfect situations, and try to leave with at least one reward I'll actually use. This guild battle preseason, 30 versus 30 in 1.2, is the kind of change that for me redefines the end game of where wins meet, because it's no longer just about your character getting strong, it's about your guild playing better together. The fact that it's a preseason gives off that official testing ground vibe, where everyone is learning the rules at the same time, making mistakes without much shame, and discovering the meta the hard way. What I like most about 30v30 is the controlled chaos. You can't be the lone hero all the time because the fight becomes about map reading, rotation, and discipline. When there are many people, victory usually goes to those who understand timing, when to advance, when to retreat, when to hold a skill. And this makes PvP more strategic than simply explosive. Personally, I would enter this preseason with a very down-to-earth mentality. Survive first, contribute second. In a large mode like this, the player who tries to make a highlight reel all the time usually becomes a resource for the enemy. So I prefer a role of consistency, holding points, helping to confirm kills, cutting off advances, and doing the tedious work that no one wants to do but that wins matches. The competitive mechanics are also the detail that can make this either an addiction or a frustration. If the game hits the mark with clear objectives, capture, escort, area control, scoreboard reading, and good respawn return rules, it can create matches with a history, where you feel that the team's decisions actually mattered, rather than just being a pile of ultimates and a gray screen. And being a preseason, I see it as the best time for your guild to create an identity, define simple calls, coordinate compositions, and even choose a style, more aggressive, more defensive, more objective focused. This change is one of those that doesn't appear in a wow trailer, but totally changes the comfort of playing day to day. The game becomes more readable, cleaner, and less tiring, especially for those who spend hours exploring and navigating menus. For me, the dialogue part is what stands out most in the before and after. Optimizing subtitles, fixing text overflow, and adjusting font size is the kind of detail that avoids that feeling of fighting with the screen during moments that should be all about story and atmosphere. The Kaifeng map in multiple languages is also a huge win, because the map is where everyone returns all the time. And when the interface doesn't handle localization/language well, exploration loses its rhythm. The improvement to the healer layout sounds small on paper, but I see it as friction reduction. Fewer clicks, less poorly positioned information, and less time stuck in an interface when the goal is to get back to the action. Finally, equipment tuning interface, with overflow fixes and localization adjustments, including the musical names/terms used there, is exactly the kind of refinement that makes the system feel fairer and clearer. Because if the UI confuses you, the game feels more complicated than it actually is.